America's evil genius, Travis Cook, with you for our first voyage, our maiden voyage, if you will, into the world of podcasting. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen my weekly video blogs on my YouTube channel. Well, we're expanding the online media empire, if you will. We're looking to get into podcasting, so you can take my teaching with you to the gym or on the bus or the train on the way to work. So you can take me with you wherever you're at and be exposed to that special brand of eye-gouging, crotch-kicking, no-holds-barred political analysis that we specialize in around here. And you know, over the last week or so, people have had their minds blown, it seems like, by the recorded comments of Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling. And yes, it seems like whenever Sterling is discussed and his comments are discussed, that every time you turn around, if it's on television, if it's on radio, if it's online like we are now, you always hear people talk in very serious tones and talking in very serious manner about what this says about our country and talking about the disturbing racial element of Donald Sterling's comments. Well, I will agree certainly that Sterling's racial comments were abysmal, disturbing, and unforgivable. However, I've got to say that the racial part of his rant was not the most mind-blowing part to me. It was not the most mind-blowing thing in the recording as far as I was concerned. There was something else in there that made my jaw absolutely drop to the floor. And it's a part of the recording that really I've seen the media and the talk shows and so forth just sort of glance over. They've glossed over it. There was a part in there where he's conversing back and forth with his girlfriend, or his then-girlfriend. I doubt she is now. There was a part in there where he basically told her that he was okay with her sleeping with other men. Now, no, he doesn't want her taking pictures with the black fellas. Doesn't want her on Instagram with him. But if you want to sleep with him, that's okay. All right, now when I heard that's what made me stop and say, dude, what the hell did you just say? I mean, let's think about something. And again, it's not that there's an issue of race here so much as that here's a dude who's a billionaire with more than 1 billion, multiple billions, who's got admittedly a relatively attractive girlfriend there, several decades his junior. And he's telling this girl, all right, you can go sleep with other dudes, just don't embarrass me with them. But you can sleep with them. Really? Donald, get yourself some self-esteem here, buddy. Here's the way I figure it. And granted, I don't have a lot of experience in the world of being an extremely wealthy guy who is banging a trophy girlfriend, okay? I've never gone that route before. I hope one day later in my life when I'm more successful, I can do that. That's sort of a life goal for me, I guess. But I don't have a lot of experience in that today. However, I would think that if you have billions of dollars and that if you're the guy who is bankrolling whatever you're bankrolling for her, I'm sure you're spending a lot of money on Fendi bags and shopping trips and just whatever it is that a trophy wife or a trophy girlfriend purchases these days. You're the one footing the bill for all that. Wouldn't it make sense that you could say, hey, I'm paying for all this stuff, so I'd really rather you not sleep with anyone else? I mean, let's not pretend that this is some sort of true love. I mean, the guy's buying a girlfriend. And again, I don't really have a huge problem with that in theory. But if you're going to buy the girlfriend, at least buy the faithfulness too. That's all I'm saying. You live in Los Angeles. There are a never-ending string of attractive, out-of-work, wannabe prospective actresses and models all over the place. She's not the only one. You can find another one easily enough. There's got to be an attractive one out there somewhere. Even a delicate Latina one, or like the one you're dating, a not-so-delicate Latina one. There's got to be one out there you like that is very attractive, is pretty hot, and will agree to sleep with only you so long as you bankroll her trips to Neiman Marcus and Bloomingdale's and whatever else. Keep your chin up, man. Have some faith in yourself. You're paying for this girl's lifestyle and you're going to let her bang Magic Johnson? And I mean, let's face it, Magic Johnson, that dude's got HIV, and you're telling your girlfriend she can go bang him. Seriously. You want to bring that into the relationship. Oh, geez. Donald, have some self-esteem, buddy. You can get a better one than that. Just as hot as she is. Maybe even cost you a little bit less. Oh, I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I guess where I come from, the way I was raised, if you're going to invest the money in a trophy wife or a trophy girlfriend, one of the things you expect is that you're buying her faithfulness too, aren't you? You buy her the nice car, you buy her the nice jewelry, the nice gifts. Maybe I'm just too much of a romantic. Maybe I don't know how people do these things these days. But I would think if I've got a trophy wife, that the least she can do is be faithful for all the money I'm spending on her. Who knows? Maybe I'm just old-fashioned when it comes to the ways of love. Something, one of the major weaknesses that human beings have is that we have a tendency to overcomplicate things. Now, don't get me wrong. We do have mental abilities that allow us to engage in complex problem solving and take difficult, complex issues and complex problems and find complex solutions that fit them. That's great. But because we have that ability, sometimes we'll look at very simple situations, very straightforward situations where the answer should seemingly be obvious, and yet we'll try to overcomplicate those matters and come up with some overcomplicated, complex solution when really the obvious solution would have worked just as well. Earlier this week, out in the great state of Oklahoma, where the wind goes sweeping down the plain. Did I get that right? Out in Oklahoma, there was something that some folks are referring to as a botched execution. There is some convicted killer. I'm not going to mention his name here because he doesn't deserve the press. But some convicted killer had his time on death row come up. They brought him in for the execution, and they administered these 3 drugs to him for a lethal injection, and I didn't react so well with him. I guess they're doing some kind of experimentation with new drugs, or there was something wrong with the old drugs that people used to use to lethally inject people, although since I don't recall hearing anyone actually survive those lethal injections, I can't imagine what would have been wrong with them. But nevertheless, there's been some kind of pressure from somewhere to come up with some new combination of drugs to lethally execute people. So they do one of these experimental cocktails, I guess you'd want to call it, on this dude. It doesn't react so well. He flips out and ends up having a heart attack and dying anyway. So at that point, I fail to see where the execution was botched. But it makes me go back and think, okay, why are we going to the point of worrying about the drugs we use to execute criminals? Is that really what we need to be spending our time troubling ourselves with? You know, it seems to me that at an earlier point in history, we had this figured out, folks. We managed to take care of executions pretty seamlessly. Didn't have to worry about all this stuff. I grew up in a small town in southern Missouri. And of course, this happened well before my time, but there is a story down there, and it is true. There was a story down there of a guy who was convicted for murder at one point, back in the 1800s. And they had the trial there in the courthouse. He was found guilty, and so they took him out on the public square, and they hung him. And he was executed. And that was the end of it. Okay, pretty simple solution, but it sure does sound like it worked. What I'm getting at is this. Why are we wasting time and taxpayer money and effort to try and figure out some different drug combination to execute criminals when we could easily go down to the hardware store and buy a hemp rope, tie it into a noose, take care of the deal? Or hey, get a few people together, give them some shotguns, and do the old school firing squad. Did hemp ropes stop working? Did firing squads stop working? Was there a point in history where firing squads had their aim messed up and they missed the guy they were trying to shoot? Did that ever happen? Because I never heard of that happening. I mean, my God, a hemp rope was good enough for Saddam Hussein. Seems to me it'd be good enough for everybody we've got on death row today. Now, I understand that some among the more liberal set, the more erudite set, the more supposedly intellectual set would tell you that we need to be concerned about the comfort level of these criminals. That we need to be overly concerned about whether they suffer when they're being sent on their one-way ticket to hell. Let me ask you a question. If you go back and look at the actions that this guy did that landed him on death row, and again, I'm not going to mention his name. You can go look it up yourself. I'm not going to give him that satisfaction or that publicity. But when he was killing his victim, do you think he really cared about how comfortable she was? Did he take any pains to make sure that her death was as comfortable and seamless and painless as possible? No, he did not. And I would say virtually every person on death row did the same thing. I am sick of this idea that we have to coddle our criminals, we have to kowtow to our criminals. The point of the death penalty is to kill those in society who would do us harm. That's what it's for. And yes, there's a deterrent factor there too. But the main thing is that the people that are dangerous to us will be eliminated. That's the point. And we don't need to keep rethinking and rehashing how we get there. We know how to get there. You hang the dude or you shoot him. That's it. Folks, so many times in life, the shortest distance between 2 points really is a straight line. And yes, folks, sometimes in life, many times in life, the simple answer does turn out to be correct.
It's only right that you should
Well, after a couple of weeks, the whole Cliven Bundy situation out at the ranch in Nevada, that seems to be winding down a bit. I'm sure we'll see other similar type of situations in the future, but there's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of reaction to it over a couple of weeks. And I think with it winding down, at least in earnest, I think it's worthwhile to remind ourselves of why this was important. Because a lot of kind of ancillary issues, side issues have come up during this situation. Things that didn't always have a whole lot to do with the situation at hand. Some racial stuff that the media tried to push and trying to castigate Bundy as a racist, which he was not. Those of you who have seen my video blog have already heard me explain that side of it. But let's take a moment and just remind ourselves why Cliven Bundy was important, why the Bureau of Land Management deal down there in Nevada was important, and why people coming out of the woodwork to defend him were so important and so critical. First things first, I'm not going to come out here and tell you that Cliven Bundy had or has an airtight legal case. No doubt about it, there are legal ambiguities, both on his side and on the side of the federal government. Of course, that needs to be adjudicated. It has been adjudicated to some extent. It looks like there's more legal battles coming about it, but be that as it may, I'm not going to come out here and tell you that I am 100% certain that Bundy is 100% right. I'm not going to expect you to buy that. So that part of it I didn't necessarily have a problem with per se. But the problem I had with the Cliven Bundy situation, and the reason that I personally defended Cliven Bundy, and while I still defend Cliven Bundy, and why I still criticize the actions of the federal government down there in Nevada, is this. You can tell a lot about a man or a government or any entity by the way in which they choose to use their limited resources. They always say money doesn't grow on trees. Well, that's true. The United States does not have unlimited resources with which to do whatever it wants. Some politicians would like you to believe that we do, but we don't. We got to make decisions. We got a certain amount of money to spend. And someone can tell you they don't have a drug problem, but if they spend 3/4 of their paycheck on drugs, they got a drug problem. You know what I'm saying? Whatever they say doesn't matter. It's what you do. It's where you choose to spend your resources. It's putting your money where your mouth is. Where you spend your resources, where you spend your money, where you spend your time says so much more about your priorities than simply what you tell people. I think we all would agree with that. Well, take this back to the federal government then. We are constantly told that the United States government does not have the resources it needs to secure the border. We are constantly told that rounding up all of the illegal immigrants and sending them back from whence they came would just be completely impossible. We don't have the resources to do that. Why? That would cost too much money. It would cost too much money to secure the border. It would cost too much money to go round up those illegals and shove them out the door. We're told that we can't just go after all those terrorists. We can't do that. We don't have that kind of scratch lying around. We can't spend that kind of money and dedicate those kind of resources to it. No, we can't do that. Well, if we can't find the resources to secure the border, if we cannot find the resources to round up the illegal aliens and shit can them out of America, something, by the way, that Bundy himself would disagree with. That's actually out there on tape. You may not have seen it. But if we don't have the resources to really go after all the terrorists in this country that are out there, then how in the Sam Hill do we have the resources to send a small army and law enforcement and guns and tanks and whatever else out to Cliven Bundy's ranch? It all boils down to a matter of priorities. I don't doubt that right now we don't have the money to do all of the things that I mentioned. I don't deny that. But yet, in such a case, it is clear that the federal government did decide that with what resources they do have, or with what resources they can procure, that it was worthwhile to take some of those resources, which could have been spent on those other more worthwhile things, and direct them towards collecting Cliven Bundy's money or probably killing him. That's really what they wanted to do. So that tells you everything. That tells you right out of the gate that the federal government in 2014 places a higher priority on the collecting of fees and taxes than they do securing our borders, than they do killing terrorists, than they do rounding up illegal aliens. The priorities of this federal government are clear. There's no doubt about it. They had limited resources, and you saw where they directed them. That was my big issue with this all along, and that's why I was 100% against the federal government and their actions in Nevada. And what we saw with those patriotic Americans coming out to defend them and use their Second Amendment rights to force this federal government into capitulation where they belong. It was heartwarming. And it was an illustration of why we have Second Amendment rights to begin with. Because our founding fathers wisely understood that for us to have a federal government and to have it be of any use of all, that it has to be the people that are in control of it. It has to be the people that rule the government, not the other way around. To avoid the tyranny of government, we must enforce the tyranny of the people onto government. That's what our founding fathers knew, and that's what was exhibited in Nevada when they backed down. When the federal government put their tail between their legs, they turned their backs and they said, we withdraw for safety concerns, for safety reasons. The safety reasons were, you didn't have the guts to die for your precious federal government, and we did have the guts to die for our freedoms. That's the scorecard. So in the aftermath of all of it, the senator from Nevada, Harry Reid, said some pretty objectionable things. But among the things he said was something that, quite frankly, I find to be the most frightening and scary thing I have ever heard a sitting United States politician ever say. I mean, there's times that you hear a politician opposed to you say something you disagree with. That happens all the time. But it's very rare that they say something truly scary, truly frightening, and that truly puts you at your wits' end, as though you know you have to defend yourself. On KSNV television recently, Reid said in his response to Bundy in that situation that we are a nation of laws, we are not a nation of men and women. Now let that sink in for a second. Think about that. We are a nation of laws. We are not a nation of men and women. Think of the implications of that. Again, it goes back to priorities, what I was talking about a few moments ago. What Harry Reid basically told you, and told his own constituents, by the way, told the very people in Nevada that vote for him, what he told you was that to him, the law and the government are a higher priority than the people. That the perpetuation of the federal government, the perpetuation of the law, no matter what injustice they might bring down, is more important to him than the wants and needs of the desires of the very people who vote for him. That the law is more important than the people it is designed to serve. How twisted is that? And this isn't just a Republican or a Democrat thing. This isn't just a conservative or a liberal thing. My goodness. You know, a lot of times people vote for Democrats, they vote for liberals because they're convinced that that Democrat will have their best interests at heart, that, well, you know, I can't get by any other way. This guy's going to look out for me in Washington. But you see, he'll only look out for you to the degree that it will help him perpetuate the federal government. When your needs are in conflict with the government's needs, you'll lose. Now, I don't doubt that there's a whole lot of people up there in Washington, most of them Democrats, but probably a few of them Republicans, You believe as Harry Reid believes. He's just been the one that was open enough to say it. But I don't doubt that he's not alone. Even our president, our alleged president, is there with him. There's a class of people in this world, a ruling class we sometimes call it, who places as priority their own power, their own jobs, their own careers, ahead of the needs of those and the wants of those that they allegedly serve. That's what Harry Reid just illustrated for you. Is the law bigger than the people? Hell no. Absolutely not. There is no set of laws, there is no government possible that can fully account for every possible want and need that human beings have. The law, no matter how well intended it is or how well constructed it is always inherently flawed because it is a creation of human beings. It cannot be perfect. We need not pretend that it can be. We should not pretend as though the perpetuation of the law, the perpetuation of the federal government is somehow more important than our own lives. Absolutely not. There are times when men must be wise enough and bold enough to say, hey, here's a situation that the law really doesn't address well enough, that the law really cannot fix or take care of. And so here's a time where we go away from the law. That's wisdom. Think back to a situation a couple weeks ago here in the St. Louis area. There was a guy, former Navy man, I believe, who was caught with some pipe bombs. And of course, he had pled guilty. They brought him in to arrest him, trial, everything. He pled guilty. But he said the reason he was collecting them was because he was going to use them on child molesters. Now, obviously using pipe bombs on child molesters is against the law. We understand that. But are the people really served by the law being enforced in that case? I mean, if what this guy is saying is true, are we really better off because a guy who was going to kill child molesters with pipe bombs is in prison? No, I don't believe we are. That would have been a case where a good district attorney, a good prosecuting attorney who was actually serving the people would have said, there's really no harm, no foul here. Let's not pursue this case. The law does not always solve everything. The law does not always account for everything. The law and the government are not always the best mechanism to solve and resolve every issue. It is far past time that our supposed leaders, well, I shouldn't even call them leaders, they're not. Our elected officials in Washington of both parties realize that. For far too long, elected politicians have thought of themselves as our leaders. They are not. That is not a value judgment simply on those who are there now. Instead, it is a judgment on the entire concept of leadership, on the entire concept of political office. Political office holders are not our leaders. We are our leaders. We give the federal government what power it has. We give them their jobs, and by God, we will lead them. If we tell the federal government, don't you arrest that man, you don't arrest that man. If we tell the federal government, don't waste your resources on Cliven Bundy, you don't waste your resources on Cliven Bundy. If we tell the federal government, you use your resources to go after illegal aliens, and by God, you go after illegal aliens. If we say that you use your resources to go after terrorists, by God, you go after terrorists. Show me one time that one Muslim mosque in this country has ever had the firepower directed at it that Cliven Bundy had pointed at him. It has not happened. Now, why hasn't it? You and the federal government have to answer to us for that. It's about time you people in the federal government met your bosses. And I'm here to tell you, there's a lot more of this to come in the future if you don't whip yourselves into shape and if you don't step back in line, step back into your place, as it were. It's time for the federal government to be sent to the back of the bus in American society.
got you, motherfucker. I got 5 up on your dime. And if you wanna peep on something, peep what I got stuck between your eyes. Since I don't believe a word you say, save it for another, baby brother. Swallow time to pay. Up on the ladder they sing, how high does a brother have to climb to touch the light? But wait till I get done with you. If you tell me don't get mixed up with the devil, it's exactly what I'm gonna do. Got you while you waited for your boy to come and fix you up again.
Before we finish up this first podcast, or this test version of our podcast, I guess, I will make one final comment on this Donald Sterling character. For all that we've heard from his little recording there, from his rant, which, as I said earlier, blew everybody's mind, there was one thing he said in the midst of all of it that I did agree with. There was one thing he said that was spot on. Now, no, don't worry, relax. It was not any of the racist stuff. That was completely wrong. That was bizarre. That was messed up to any degree you want to say. But there was one thing he said in there that actually made some degree of sense. At one point when he was arguing with the ex-girlfriend, and she was questioning him on the people that work for him, the players that work for him, and that sort of thing, he made what I thought was a very salient point that we don't often talk about in America, and I think that we really need to. He said this when talking about employing these guys and putting them in positions where they get food and clothes and cars and houses and live a pretty good lifestyle. He said this much, and I quote, "Who gives it to them? Does someone else give it to them? Do I know what I have? Who makes this game? Do I make the game, or do they make the game?" Well, it's going to maybe rub some people the wrong way. But in that case, Donald Sterling is right. He does make the game. And I'm not just talking about basketball here. I'm talking about practically any industry. Donald Sterling is the owner of the team. He is the one who makes the game. If it weren't for him, you wouldn't have an NBA game to watch. Now, some of you are jumping up and down and screaming, well, what about the players? The players are the ones that sell the tickets. Well, the players play a part, no doubt about it, and they do play a significant role, but I want to ask you a question. If you had 10 NBA players that just randomly showed up at some basketball court in some park somewhere to play a shirts and skins game, do you think you'd be able to get 15, 16, 17,000 fans there to pay $100 a pop or $200 a pop to watch them play shirts and skins on some park basketball court somewhere? Of course not. See, someone's got to rent that real nice building, the Staples Center, where the Clippers play at. Someone's got to buy the uniforms. Someone's got to pay for the travel. Someone's got to buy the advertising. Someone's got to promote the team. Someone's got to run the office. This is something that so many Americans lose sight of. And again, I'm using the basketball example, but you could apply this to most any business. There are so many times that we hear what we call labor these days claim that they are the ones who generate the profits. Well, they are one of the elements that helps generate a profit. And of course, it varies by industry. It varies by business how much of a role labor plays. But don't ever let the labor in any industry fool you into thinking that they and they alone generate the lion's share of the profit. When people say that, they're falling into something that economist Thomas Sowell has referred to as the mystique of labor, which is to say, the idea that labor is the single biggest factor in the generation of profit. This is not true. Think of a factory. We all like to think that the factory workers, the people on the assembly line, that if they didn't do their jobs, that factory couldn't be profitable. Well, in the short term, that might be right, but I want you to think of something. If there were no factory, then could those factory workers generate the same kind of profit by assembling things on their own? Most likely not. On the other hand, if those assembly folks, those people working the line, decided they weren't going to do this anymore, how difficult would it be to replace them? Well, it kind of depends on the industry a little bit in terms of specialized skills, but in most industries, it wouldn't really be that hard, especially when you consider how much we have in terms of real unemployment right now. You could get people to replace them. But if someone who owns the building decides they're not going to play ball anymore, isn't that man's contributions a lot more difficult to replace than those who are working on the line? I should say they are. What if the investors decide they're not going to invest anymore? They give up their stock. They sell their stock. Wouldn't their contributions be more difficult to replace than those of labor? In most cases, yes, they would. See, what I'm getting at is this. The value of labor is not in the actual toil that you put in. Your pay, your salary is not and should not be considered a reflection of how, quote unquote, hard you work. That's not a direct relationship. It never has been. Some people have fooled themselves into thinking it is. It is not. Instead, your salary is a reflection of how valuable your contributions are to the overall end product and how scarce your contributions are when compared to the rest of the marketplace. Now, yes, playing basketball is a specialized skill. That's why those guys make 6 and 7 figures and a lot of us don't, because a lot of us can't play basketball like they do. Get it. But Donald Sterling's contributions are worth a lot more to that team. That's why he makes a lot more. Because if you didn't have a building to play in, it wouldn't matter how good your team is. If you couldn't pay for him to travel anywhere, it wouldn't matter how good your team is. Someone's got to pay for that. And one last thing I'll leave you with, and this is more about work and industry in general. The one thing that people don't ever give ownership and management credit for is that they are the ones who actually have the most at risk at any given time in a company, in an endeavor. Some of you are scratching your head. You don't understand what I mean by that. Think about something. When you go into your factory job tomorrow, you will know that if you work 40 hours that week, you will get paid for your 40 hours worked. Okay? Yes, you're sacrificing time for your wage, but you know you're going to get that wage. You know that even if that company does not sell one thing tomorrow, if you work for a widget factory and they don't sell one widget next month, you know you're still going to get your pay for the 40 hours you worked. So really, your risk is comparatively small. Now, of course, we could factor in some other things, like if you have a dangerous occupation or things like that. I get that. But by and large, your risk is pretty small. But what about that owner? What about the owner of that company? He still has to pay you either way. But if he doesn't sell a widget this month, he's not going to make any money. He is going to pay you. He is going to pay a rent on his factory. He is going to pay the light bill. He is going to pay the electric bill. He's going to pay all of the incidentals that go into running the business. But he only makes money if and when he turns a profit. And that does not always happen. Ditto for the other investors. They're the ones at risk. Now, thinking logically, those people could not be expected to endure such risk in order to give you a job unless there was significant potential there that the profit they could potentially end up making would so far outweigh the risk that it was worth the gamble. Now, I know to some of you this is very obvious stuff, and I'm sorry to belabor you with an obvious point. But to more and more of America, it seems like this point is missed. The investor, the owner, the manager is in most businesses far more important to the overall production than the labor is. Because their contributions, that of ownership, investment, and management, are far more difficult to replace. It's much easier to find 10 or 20 people to work an assembly line than it is to find a good CEO or to find someone to invest in your company. So guess what? For all of these sins of Donald Sterling, and they were many, I'm not denying that. He's a first-rate asshole, if I might say that. But for all of the bad things we can say about him, his contributions to the LA Clippers will be much more difficult to replace than if, say, one of his players decided to quit the team because they didn't like what he said. Boy, that puts things in a lot of perspective, doesn't it? So yeah, Donald Sterling was the game. We might not like him. I don't like him. I might think he's a senile nut job. But in terms of the business sense, he was absolutely right. He was far more important to that team than any of his players or all of his players combined. Thanks for joining us on this initial podcast, this test podcast. We will see you on my video blog each week on youtube.com/America's Evil Genius. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @RealTravisCook. See you next time.